Princess Margaret cornered Diana in a palace corridor at 11 p.m. on July 28, 1981, and what she revealed about marriage to a Windsor would prove devastatingly accurate 16 years later. Now you will hear a dramatized reflection inspired by the emotions, relationships, and public struggles behind this chapter of royal history. The wedding rehearsal had finished hours ago. Clarence House was finally quiet. Diana Spencer, 20 years old, and less than 12 hours from becoming Princess of Wales, couldn't sleep. She wandered the corridors in a silk dressing gown, her mind racing. 750 million people would watch her walk down the aisle tomorrow. The ivory taffeta gown, with its 25-foot train hung in her room like a beautiful ghost. The enormity pressed down on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. She had experienced panic attacks during the engagement, moments when her heart raced and the room tilted. Everyone assured her it was normal, pre-wedding anxiety. Her sisters said she was lucky. The world celebrated her fairy tale. So why did she feel like she was walking toward a cliff edge in the dark? That's when she heard the voice behind her, low and unmistakable. Margaret. Princess Margaret stood at the corridor's end, cigarette in hand, still dressed in elegant evening clothes from the pre-wedding dinner. She looked beautiful and damaged in the dim light, her famous eyes assessing Diana with something that might have been sympathy or recognition. They had barely spoken during the engagement. Margaret kept her distance from family events, carrying an air of boredom and resentment. But now she walked slowly toward Diana, and there was something deliberate in her approach. Margaret stopped a few feet away, studying her future sister-in-law with intensity. She took a long drag from her cigarette before speaking. The words were not congratulation. They were a warning, delivered in Margaret's distinctive voice, slightly slurred, but absolutely clear. She told Diana that marrying into this family meant giving up every natural impulse, every honest emotion, every piece of yourself that didn't serve the institution. But no one knew the real consequence of that moment, or how Margaret's own destroyed dreams would make her the only royal who truly understood what Diana was about to endure. Margaret had been where Diana stood decades earlier. She had loved Group Captain Peter Townsend, her father's equerry, divorced and therefore unacceptable. Margaret had been willing to give up everything for him, but the pressure had been relentless. Her sister Elizabeth, newly crowned queen, could not give permission without causing constitutional crisis. The church forbade it. The government opposed it. Margaret had been forced to choose between love and duty. She chose duty, releasing a statement, renouncing Townsend, and something inside her died that day. Her subsequent marriage to Anthony Armstrong Jones was a disaster. Tony's infidelities were legendary. Margaret's own affairs became gossip fodder. They divorced in 1978, making Margaret the first senior royal to divorce since Henry VIII. The failure haunted her because she had sacrificed her real love for the institution, and the institution had given her nothing except loneliness and a title that felt like a prison. Now she looked at Diana, this young girl with hope still shining despite obvious anxiety, and Margaret saw herself 30 years earlier, someone about to make the same catastrophic mistake, believing duty and happiness could coexist. Margaret knew better. Charles didn't love Diana. Margaret had watched her nephew throughout the engagement, seen the distance in his eyes, the performed affection. She knew about Camilla. Everyone in the family knew, though no one acknowledged it. Charles had been in love with Camilla for years. The family needed Charles to marry someone suitable, young and virginal, who would produce heirs. Diana fit perfectly. That she was also vulnerable and desperately in love with being loved made her easy to manipulate into a marriage that served everyone's needs except her own. Margaret understood this because she had been on the other side, deemed unsuitable, cast aside so the institution could continue unchanged. What happened next would determine whether Diana heard the warning or dismissed it as bitter ramblings. Margaret spoke for perhaps 15 minutes, her words cutting through every comforting illusion Diana had constructed. She described waking up every morning knowing you had sacrificed the person you loved for an institution that would never love you back. She explained how the family would expect Diana to endure whatever Charles did, whatever humiliation, with perfect composure and silent dignity. Margaret told her that showing emotion would be seen as weakness, that asking for help would be interpreted as failure. The family had no mechanism for compassion. They had protocol instead. They had tradition and duty and 1,000 years of history, but they did not have space for a young woman's pain or desperate need to be genuinely loved rather than strategically married. Margaret described her own wedding to Tony, how she had known it was wrong, how she went through with it because the alternative was admitting that giving up Peter had been for nothing. She told Diana about the long nights in a loveless marriage, the affairs that filled time but not emptied it. Then Margaret said something that would echo in Diana's mind for years. She told her it wasn't too late to leave, that canceling a wedding was painful and embarrassing but survivable, while staying in a marriage to someone who loved another woman would destroy her slowly from the inside. Marrying Charles tomorrow meant committing to a lifetime of pretending, of smiling for cameras while dying inside, of producing heirs and performing happiness, while Charles maintained his real relationship in secret. Margaret had seen it happen before. She didn't want that for Diana, perhaps because seeing Diana's hope and anxiety was like looking at a ghost of her younger self. Diana listened, frozen, unable to respond or properly process what Margaret was saying. Part of her recognized the truth. She had seen the distance in Charles. She had found Camilla's photograph among his belongings. She had sensed the wrongness even as everyone assured her it was normal. But no one knew the real consequence of that conversation, or why Diana ultimately ignored the warning despite recognizing its truth. Diana had nowhere to go. Her family had pushed her toward this marriage. Her apartment was already given up. The wedding preparations had consumed a year and millions of pounds. Backing out now would make her the villain, the hysterical girl who couldn't handle pressure. More than that, Diana wanted to believe it would be different. Margaret was bitter because her marriage had failed, but Diana and Charles could build something real. She was young enough to adapt, loving enough to win him over eventually. The idea that she might be walking into a nightmare her own determination couldn't fix was too terrible to accept 12 hours before her wedding, with the world already celebrating outside. So Diana thanked Margaret for her concern, said something about nerves, and excused herself. Margaret watched her go, and those who saw the princess's face afterwards said she looked devastated. What happened next would prove every word of Margaret's warning accurate. The wedding proceeded. Diana walked down the aisle at St. Paul's Cathedral, made her vows and became Princess of Wales. The honeymoon began with Camilla's photographs and cufflinks, exactly as Margaret could have predicted. The marriage deteriorated with brutal speed. Charles maintained his relationship with Camilla throughout. Diana struggled with bulimia, depression, and desperate isolation. The family offered protocol instead of support, exactly as Margaret had warned. Every prediction came true, but knowing she had been right gave Margaret no satisfaction, only deepening sadness. She watched Diana's public disintegration with the horror of someone who had tried to prevent it. When Diana gave her panorama interview, exposing the emptiness of her marriage and the institution's failure, Margaret reportedly watched with tears, not vindication, but recognition. Diana was saying publicly everything Margaret had tried to warn her about that night. The relationship between Margaret and Diana after the wedding was complex and distant. They were never close, but there were moments when Diana would catch Margaret's eye across a room at family gatherings, and something would pass between them, an acknowledgement of shared understanding about what it meant to be destroyed by choices made within the constraints of this family. Margaret attended Diana's funeral in 1997, visibly emotional. She died less than 5 years later, on February 9, 2002. In her final years, Margaret occasionally mentioned Diana to close friends, always with regret that she hadn't been more forceful that night, that she hadn't found words that would have convinced Diana to leave. But no words could have changed what happened. Diana was trapped by circumstances, by expectations, by her own hope, and what happened next would show how the warning eventually shaped the next generation's choices. When William and Harry grew old enough to understand their mother's story, they learned from her mistakes and from Margaret's wisdom. They came too late. William moved slowly with Catherine Middleton, giving her years to understand what royal life meant before proposing. Harry eventually left the institution entirely when he saw it beginning to damage Meghan the same way it had destroyed his mother. Both sons heard Margaret's warning echoing through their mother's story. They made different choices because two women had one honest conversation in a corridor at 11 p.m. on July 28, 1981. And though that conversation couldn't save Diana, its truth eventually freed her children. Margaret's warning was an act of compassion from someone who knew exactly what was coming and tried to prevent it. That Diana didn't listen doesn't diminish the warning's truth or the courage it took to speak when silence would have been easier. Margaret risked family anger to tell hard truths to someone she barely knew because she couldn't bear to watch another young woman walk into the same trap. The family likely never knew about that conversation. Margaret never mentioned it publicly, and Diana never specifically credited Margaret with trying to stop her. But the conversation happened, one damaged princess trying to save another. Some warnings come too late even when they come early. Diana married Charles 12 hours after Margaret's warning, and every word proved accurate over the following 16 years. The institution did expect silence. The family did choose protocol over compassion. Charles did maintain his relationship with Camilla. Diana did find herself trapped in a marriage that served everyone except her. But Margaret's warning planted something that grew slowly. Diana's eventual willingness to speak publicly about her suffering, to name the institution's failures, to refuse silent endurance, might have had roots in that corridor conversation. If Margaret, a born princess who understood the system, said the institution was fundamentally flawed, then perhaps Diana's inability to endure wasn't personal weakness. Perhaps the problem was the system itself. That realization, growing from Margaret's warning through years of suffering, eventually gave Diana courage to fight back, to do her interview, to expose truths the family wanted hidden. Margaret died without knowing if her warning had mattered, believing she had failed to save Diana, but the warning had been heard. It just took 16 years and unspeakable suffering for Diana to fully understand what Margaret had been trying to tell her. By then it was too late for Diana, but not too late for the truth to shape how her sons approached their own marriages and their relationship with the institution that destroyed their mother. Two unhappy princesses, one warning delivered and one ignored, but both ultimately telling the same truth about what it cost to belong to this family. Margaret tried to save Diana from repeating her mistake. Diana couldn't be saved, but her sons heard the warning echoing through their mother's tragedy. Sometimes the warning doesn't prevent the disaster. Sometimes it only explains it afterward and helps the next generation make different choices. Margaret's words in that corridor were the truth about royal marriage that no one wanted Diana to hear before it was too late to escape. She heard it anyway, from the one person brave enough or bitter enough or compassionate enough to speak honestly. The wedding happened 12 hours later. The nightmare began immediately after, and every word Margaret spoke proved devastatingly, irreversibly true.